Breaking news now from the war in Syria, and this could be significant. Reports that chemical weapons have been used in that conflict.
U.S. officials say their latest intelligence shows Syrian forces over the weekend began mixing two chemicals needed to make deadly sarin gas, raising significant new concern that Bashar al-Assad may be preparing a gas attack.
The longer the bloodshed goes on, the greater the prospect that the institutions of the state of Syria implode. And therefore, the greater the danger is to the region and the world that chemical weapons fall into the hands of really bad actors.
According to Western intelligence officials, they tell us that unlike the reports that we're hearing right now out of Syria, that in fact it was the Assad regime used some type of chemical weapons on rebels in northern Syria, around the Aleppo region. Now, of course, the Assad regime and the Assad state television have said that rebels used those weapons, but what we're hearing right now from Western intelligence officials is just the opposite, that in fact it was the Assad regime used some type of chemical weapons and killed somewhere between 15 and 26 people.
I want to make it absolutely clear to Assad and those under his command, the world is watching. The use of chemical weapons is and would be totally unacceptable. And if you make the tragic mistake of using these weapons, there will be consequences and you will be held accountable.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Press for Truth TV. I'm your host, Dan Dix. Today is Tuesday, March 19th, 2013. And there are reports coming in today about a chemical attack in Syria, near Aleppo, one of the most densely populated areas of Syria. And the Western propaganda spin machine is on a campaign now here in the West to convince you that there is a need for military intervention in Syria. Now, this all comes despite the fact that Bashar al-Assad has announced that his government is not responsible for these chemical attacks, but it is in fact the al-Qaeda-led rebels who used chemicals on the Syrian people. And I think one part of the puzzle, a big piece of this story that is missing from the Western media, is the fact that these al-Qaeda-led rebels are the creation of the CIA. It is British and Israeli and American intelligence who have been arming and funding these rebels in order to generate the chaos, to create the mayhem that is necessary to provide the excuse for military intervention. And we have to be aware of the fact that there is an agenda for a complete takeover of the Middle East. And it has been excelling at an exponential rate in the last 10 years. But I can't help but wonder, when are people going to start to see the patterns that emerge here? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we were all told about the weapons of mass destruction and the need to go in and stop Saddam Hussein. Well, many of us know that it later came out that there were no WMDs. In fact, it was recently revealed that the CIA and the FBI knew full well that there were no WMDs before the invasion. But again, it's all about providing the excuse to intervene militarily, all under the guise of humanitarianism. So that's what we're seeing right now coming from the propaganda spin machine here in the West. So today I would advise you, if you're trying to learn about some of the things that are going on in Syria, turn your TV off. Right now it is just pure propaganda trying to convince you that we need to get in there to stop Bashar al-Assad. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that he's some shining beacon of light or anything. This man is a dictator. Their government has problems, just like every government does. But what I'm trying to tell you is that we are being manipulated here in the West by the mainstream media to convince us that there's a need to go in there and to intervene militarily. And I think this plays into the bigger picture of their goals of an eventual invasion of Iran. But, I mean, steps have to be taken. They have to take over Syria and Hezbollah before they could even dream about invading Iran. So we're now starting to see all these steps unfold. And again, if you're trying to learn about this, please turn your television off. It is pure propaganda today coming from the mainstream. So In that respect, I want to leave you today with an interview that I did with the Iranian news station Press TV in Iran over 7 months ago now, where they asked me about my views on the propaganda spin machine here in the West that's trying to convince people to get behind this push for military intervention. And in this interview over 7 months ago, I also point out that we have to be careful of a false flag type scenario where they could use chemical weapons to be blamed on the Assad regime in order to provide the excuse to go in and intervene militarily. And again, of course, this is all being done by the Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda-led rebels, but we're trying to, they're trying to convince us here that this is all the Assad regime and he needs to be stopped. So here's that interview that I gave Press TV just over 7 months ago, talking about everything we're seeing in the news today.
We're going to cross over to Toronto now. We're being joined by the founder of Press for Truth, Dan Dix, to discuss the situation in Syria a bit further. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, sir. Now, the fight for Aleppo still continues, with many terming it as a turning point. How important do you think Aleppo has become in what many call the proxy war of the U.S. and its allies against Assad?
Well, knowing that Aleppo is the most densely populated city in Syria, it is the key to this current battle that is going on. If they manage to take over the city of Aleppo, that could potentially mean the beginning of the end, and that's why we hope to see the Syrian government continue to push back these Al-Qaeda-led rebels who, we have to remember, there's a large propaganda campaign going on here in the West to convince everyone that the violence and the bloodshed is coming at the hands of the Assad government. Meanwhile, we've known for decades now that the U.S., along with British and Israeli criminal elements within the intelligence networks, have been the ones funding, training, arming these Al-Qaeda rebels and creating the chaos and generating the mayhem in order to provide an excuse for military intervention under the guise of humanitarianism. So I think Aleppo is absolutely important to continue to pay attention to because what happens there could certainly trigger the rest of this ongoing situation there in Syria.
Indeed, now the UN observers have moved out of Aleppo, as we've just reported, due to the heavy fighting, and their mandate also soon comes to an end. Annan has left his post. The UN observer mandate is set to expire soon as well. Where does this leave the 6-point peace plan?
Well, I think having Annan announce his stepping down is going to be used again as more propaganda to suggest that a 6-point peace plan is not possible and that this conflict cannot be resolved peacefully. Therefore, military intervention may be the only answer to stop the bloodshed. So it's certainly unfortunate that Annan is stepping down, but that's something that we have to certainly pay attention to as well. They could say that it looks like there is no peaceful resolution, especially if he's stepping down. Therefore, maybe the only answer is going to be military intervention, and I have a feeling that some of the things we may be hearing more of here in the West in response to Annan's announcement of stepping down.
Right now, speaking of which, many have warned the United States against military intervention in Syria. It is perhaps a war that the U.S. may not be able to afford, but would it come to that if things don't go the way the West wants, or will it continue with this proxy war through militants, a lot of whom are not even Syrian?
Well, we have to understand that there's been a concerted effort over the last few decades for a complete, total takeover of the Middle East, one nation at a time. We've seen it with Iraq. We've seen it as recently as with Libya. And so these efforts are certainly going to continue with Syria in this proxy war, which many of us fear that the bigger picture here is also an eventual military-led intervention in Iran. I think they have to focus on Syria first because of the allies there, and if they manage to get their stronghold, take over Aleppo there, the next phase may very well be to have an opportunity to infiltrate or take over Hezbollah, which would open up the door for an Iran invasion. So that's why it's incredibly important to continue to expose this propaganda for what it is, so that we can counter that and hopefully bring some awareness to some people here in the West that this is not going to be beneficial for the Syrian people. I mean, who made the United States and Israel and Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Britain, and others the global police here? If the Syrian people want to oust Assad, it should be completely up to them to do so, and not outside military forces who are imposing this on the Assad regime.
Right, and very quickly, if you can, as far as the mainstream media goes, it has played its part with regard to the situation in Syria in building up this consent against the Assad government. How do you interpret it?
I'm sorry?
How do you interpret the role the mainstream media has played as far as the situation in Syria goes?
Well, getting the people behind this idea of a need for military intervention is absolutely key to be able to go in there. And I think that's why we're seeing such a ramping up of the propaganda and the spin campaign over here in regards to the situation in Syria. There's so many conflicting reports. It's almost hard to keep track of everything that's going on. You mentioned earlier there was some intelligence officers who were captured, and as I understand it, some chemical weapons may have potentially been obtained by the Al-Qaeda rebels from Libya through Turkey, and we have to be careful of the scenario of a false flag type event, where if this propaganda campaign does not work, they may try to stage some sort of chemical attack, which would be blamed on the Assad government. Of course, this would be done by the Al-Qaeda rebels to be blamed on Assad to provide the excuse, once again, to intervene militarily. So if this propaganda campaign does not hold up, we have to be very aware of the fact that they may take it to the extent of launching a false flag type scenario there in Syria. But once again, the most important thing we can do here in the West is try to counter this propaganda and let the people of the world know that it is indeed the Al-Qaeda, American, Israeli-funded rebels who are the ones responsible for this, the loss of civilians and the bloodshed going on there right now.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That was the founder of Press for Truth, Dan Dix, joining us there from studios in Toronto. Many thanks indeed for your insight here on Press TV.